Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, terrific. So just wanted to thank you for joining the this new episode of the Daloopa's data model webinar. So in today's call, and that's why we had to wait for Thomas, he will walk us through the various ways, the different ways you can use our data to discover new KPIs, and also how you can incorporate them into to your models. And so with that, I will hand it over to Thomas.
Thank you, Anas. So the objective of today's webinar is to really showcase the level of detail in Daloopa's models and to walk the viewers through what the methods are to get deeper into any company that they're covering. I'll show you guys some of the different ways to get access to the data, as well as go through some of the corner cases of how things can work. So without further ado, let me get started. And Anas, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. All right, let me stop sharing mine. Are you?
You're still sharing your screen.
Should be the case. It's stopped.
Perfect.
Is it working now?
Yep.
All right, perfect.
All right. So the first and the most obvious way to discover KPIs is obviously to download our models and go through the details within our models. So we're gonna use PayPal as an example today, and I will walk everyone through how the models are actually being set up and where the KPIs lie. Second here. So there we go. So all of our models will be set up in a relatively similar way in terms of how the data is being organized. So if you collapse everything, you'll see all our major sections, right? We always start with what we call documents before moving to guidance, KPIs, segmentals, geographical breakdowns, your 3 statements, your GAAP to non-GAAP adjustments, as well as any other information that we believe might be pertinent to this business. So let's go section by section and quickly understand what the different things are. So if you look at documents, essentially we'll be providing the filings itself, so the 10Qs and the 10Ks, as well as any of the 8Ks or supplementals that are being provided, right? If you need to get access to the latest 10Q, you can simply click on this link and we will bring you to the entirety of the 10Q, right? The same thing for the EX99.1, which is basically just your 8K. So that's the document section. After the document section is where the model begins. So let's take a look at guidance. And I selected PayPal because PayPal has some of the more nuanced guidance of the companies that we look at. The way we structure guidance is we structure guidance in a hierarchical format, right? We start with, in this case, quarterly. So everything in this section is actually quarterly guidance given by PayPal. And quarterly guidance essentially just means guidance for the next quarter. So in this case, if you look at the 17% number, what it's essentially saying is that the revenue growth at the current spot rate basis, as disclosed in 2019 Q4, for next quarter is 17%. So the 17% is not the guidance for 2019 Q4, it's the guidance as being disclosed in 2019 Q4. The reason we do it this way is so that you can differentiate between all the nuances of the guide, right? You can look at all the high end of the guide, which is right here, all the low ends of the guide, which is right here for quarterly. Sometimes the company doesn't give you high and low ends, they give you approximate guidance, so they'll be right here. And then sometimes they give you medium-term guides, sometimes they give you annual guides. So how do you read an annual guide, for instance? If you look at this current spot rate net revenue, what basically is going on is as the year progresses on, PayPal is changing their guidance for the annual net revenue number. So you can observe the change as disclosed in 2019 Q1, which is this 18.1, as disclosed in 2019 Q2 and in 2019 Q3. Very often when the company discloses annual guides in Q4, this is for the next year. So just bear in mind that this 21 is actually a guidance for 2020, right? So in the same vein, we have the low ends of the guides, we have the high ends of the guides, we have the approximate guides. And so one of the things that a lot of people notice immediately when they look at a Daloopa model is just the sheer volume of guidance that's being disclosed. Because the reality is companies actually provide a ton of guidance, but very often people miss out on the fact that there is a lot of flavor in the guidance if you just look at some of the key items, right? If you look at gross margin guide or revenue guide, you miss out on the tiny nuances that sometimes the company is giving you a range, and even though the midpoint of the range hasn't changed, the range itself has expanded. Or they're giving you guides that has FX neutral adjustments, or they're giving you guides that don't have FX neutral adjustments. So the beauty of the Daloopa model is that we capture all of that flavor, and you want to be able to observe that flavor. And I think what a lot of our customers have told us that they like about the way we do it is the fact that not only do we show them what is currently being guided, we show them all the information that has historically been guided. So for instance, if you look at this number, right, on the low end of the annual guide, they're disclosing net revenue growth, but there are a bunch of blanks because the exact same guide actually hasn't been given for a while, and they're restarting the guide. Right, so we are giving you the time series, not just as continuously running time series, but also with time series that might have gaps in the middle. And for anyone who spends any time thinking about guides, you realize that a lot of times not giving a guide is almost as pertinent as giving a guide, right? The fact that a guide has changed or the way you're guiding has changed is information that needs to be given some thought on. So that's how we do guides, right? Let's take a look at KPIs and segmental breakdowns and what are the differences. So PayPal, being a payments-based company, has a lot of information that do not directly impact revenue, but do change the way you think about how the company is generating revenue, right? So that's what generally KPI sections will be. So it could be anything from active accounts to total payment volume to non-GAAP operating margins to employee headcounts to, if it's a software company, they might disclose ARR, they might disclose net revenue retention, they might disclose average contract value and so on. So all pertinent information as it pertains to the business, but more from an operational perspective and less so from like a financial statement perspective. This is where you will find all of that information. And because Daloopa scrubs the data very thoroughly, this is where a lot of people come in to discover what KPIs are actually being released. So if you've been covering PayPal for the last 5 years, most of these information will be second nature to you. But let's say you've never really dove into PayPal before, and this is your first time diving into the business, this becomes incredibly useful because instead of going through, multiple 10Qs and 8Ks to get an understanding of what is being disclosed, you can simply just open this model and just take a look, right? You can quickly see, I guess they think about payment transaction growth, both in terms of quarter on quarter and year on year. Right, you can basically get a sense of how the management is thinking through what to disclose from an operational perspective. And then the next section is segmental breakdown. Segmental breakdown is just really how the company discloses revenue by segments and any other disclosures that are relevant to that. And then geographical breakdown is self-explanatory. Some companies have very clean geographical breakdowns, some companies don't. So in this case, PayPal's geographical breakdowns are very clean. They give you net revenue by US, UK, and ROW. And then after that, you have your 3 statements, right? 3 statements are pretty straightforward. So we're going to skip over those for now. But let's take a look at GAAP to non-GAAP. This is where a ton of value is being extracted. So when you think about a lot of the numbers that are being disclosed in non-GAAP land, one of the things that you probably want to know is what are the adjustments that go into non-GAAP numbers. The issue with adjustments is that by nature of being adjustments, they may or may not be recurring in nature. So you have adjustments such as stock-based comp that's obviously going to be in recurring nature, but you also have separation, you have restructuring, you have acquisition-related expenses that really are not. And what Daloopa is going to give you is we're going to give you the bridge exactly as the company discloses the bridge. And as a result, you will be able to see the flavor of all the adjustments over time. And very much like guidance. Sometimes the blanks tell a story too. Right, when you see that there is always a restructuring cost and there are periods where there are no restructuring costs, the blanks tell you almost as important of a story as when the restructuring cost is high. Right, so this is where you come in and you see all the GAAP to non-GAAP adjustments. And then after all the GAAP to non-GAAP adjustments, obviously it's a lot of them, that's where you get into information that generally speaking might not be super relevant from a model building perspective, but might be useful to have in your back pocket. Most of our customers tell us that the way they use the information in Daloopa's models is they like to keep it as a tab, as a reference tab, but obviously not everything is immediately relevant. So for example, right, if you come in here, because PayPal has a credit arm, they do disclose merchant loans, they do disclose fees receivables, allowances, consumer loans, and interest receivables. But if you're a PayPal analyst, while this is important to know, it's less important from a model driving perspective because it's not simply a big part of the business operations today, right? In the same thought process, PayPal has 2% fixed rate notes. They have 22 notes. They have all sorts of different bonds that, the reality is it's not super relevant if you're the equity investor, but it's good to have the information laid out in front of you. So that's what other breakdowns are really for, capturing information that you might want to have at some point, but you might not want to have in your model right away. So if we go through that, you have all the other financial details. We usually have the section of deprecated data points. Not super relevant, only as it pertains to companies where there were important data points that used to exist, but no longer exist anymore, right? So high level, that's how our models are being set up. And the level of detail in our models tend to be relatively high. And the level of detail has a tendency to change from industry to industry. So for example, if you were to look at a REIT, for the folks who do cover REITs, you will know that the level of disclosures in REITs tend to overshadow the level of disclosures in pretty much any other industry for a very simple reason. REITs have a tendency to disclose data that are on a asset level basis. REITs, material companies, some energy companies have a tendency to disclose mine level data, hotel level data, office level data. And so what you're going to see is you're going to see things such as, number of rooms of Hampton Inns that's owned by Apple Hospitality, right? Number of hotels in each area, occupancy of each hotel, ADR of each hotel. Like, it is a dramatic amount of information to comb through. It's a dramatic amount of information that sometimes do not get disclosed, sometimes does. And it is next to impossible to stitch this together by hand as an analyst, nor is it particularly useful from a model driving perspective. There's simply too much noise, right? If I'm just going to quickly scroll through, and you'll see that they actually disclose on a town level, on a state level, on a city level, on a brand level, like all sorts of ways you can cut the data. They're pretty much disclosing it in their documentation, right? As usual, you can always click in and you can see, oh, I'm curious what Phoenix, Arizona, North Carolina is doing from an occupancy perspective. We're going to have that data, right? Are you going to drive your Apple hospitality remodel based on these occupancy numbers? Probably not, but it's good to have them there. And where this becomes useful, we've heard a lot of times, is during management meetings. You're talking about a certain asset, or management is saying, hey, look, we're thinking about reducing our focus on the South and driving more asset growth in the Northeast. That's when you can say, okay, I wonder why. What is occupancy across the South? What is going on in the South? What is my footprint in the South? Or if there's a hurricane like there is right now that's sweeping through Florida, what are the impacts to my assets? This is where you can quickly come in and be like, okay, what is Tampa looking like for these guys? What's Fort Lauderdale looking like for these guys, right? So not information that you will need to drive your model on a day-to-day basis, but in days like today, when a hurricane sweeps through a state, it becomes relatively useful for you to go through, right? So you get obviously a ton more data with REITs just because they disclose a ton more. It's a little bit philosophy is we try to capture everything there is to be captured, right? Not only the data that is relevant from a model building perspective, but the data that is relevant from a company disclosure perspective. So that brings me to the second thing that I think I want to talk about, which is what happens when I've downloaded this sheet and the company is now giving me more information. So how do I deal with that? If I have an Apple Hospitality remodel and you're telling me the company's disclosing over 3,000 rows of pure data, how in the world am I supposed to know what is new and what is not new without downloading a model? So this is where the email alerts come in. When you log into Daloopa, you will notice that all the models by default are not subscribed. So for instance, I'm going to unsubscribe myself from a model right now. And you will notice that most models have a subscribe button. So what you want to do is for a company that you're interested in, you've downloaded the model for, you want to hit the subscribe button. The reason is once you have the model subscribed, we will send you an email when the company actually drops earnings. And the email looks like this. Right. So in this case, it says, hey, model for Hilton has been updated in your repository. Model for Hyatt has been updated. And what it says here is we're telling you that the model has been updated, but at the same time, we're giving you the Excel row as well as the information that is newly added in this quarter. So for a company like Hyatt, when you disclose by assets, every quarter they have a tendency to drop a lot of new information, right? For companies like if you were to look at like Apple, for instance, they might never drop you any information and this will be blank. And this is where it gets useful because everything in here is something that is brand new disclosure by the company, right? You can choose to ignore it. Like I really don't care about ALG resorts. It's just not relevant for me. But it will be good to go through this and just see for yourself what is new. Because a big challenge that analysts have highlighted to us is, when you cover 50, 60 stocks and they're all dropping earnings at the same time, you're trying to update all of the models, you're trying to figure out what's going on in the business. You're only coming back, days later, weeks later, to think about, hey, are there new disclosures that actually matter that I do need to comb through and think about, right? And at that point, you might be a week too late into a disclosure that was important. So this is what this email is really for. Right, you read this email and you very quickly get an understanding of all the new disclosures that the company is reporting. So I think that's the main few things that I would like to talk about in terms of how people explore KPIs with Daloopa. I know Anas told me that there were a couple of questions before this, so we can go through them and I can show maybe go through a couple of examples if we have some time left over.
Yeah, that is actually, Thomas, that is a lot of very, very insightful information. Very. Even myself find it very interesting, actually. So yeah, thanks for that. So there were a couple of questions from clients that I'd like to ask and get your insights on. The first one is how we handle newly disclosed KPIs.
Yeah, so this is exactly how we handle newly disclosed KPIs. We showcase all the KPIs in the Excel rows. And what will also happen is when you do download the model, if a KPI is fresh, it's actually going to be highlighted in yellow. So I'm just going to fake a fresh KPI. Let's hypothetically assume that these two KPIs are fresh. What is actually going to happen is, did I just break my computer? There we go. Yeah, so let's assume that these KPIs are newly disclosed. So what will happen is they will be highlighted in bright yellow. So not only will you see the KPIs in bright yellow when you download the model, we will send you an email telling you where the yellow locations are. And then you can click on this to get to the login page, download the model, and you'll be able to get this guy with all the yellow highlights.
And that brings me to the next item. So let's say, for example, what if a KPI is disclosed today, but it hasn't been disclosed in the previous quarters?
So that's essentially the same question, Anas. If it's disclosed today and has not been disclosed before, this is the same process. It's a brand new disclosure, and therefore we run through the same process.
One, and I think we haven't really touched on it. And so one of the questions that came in was I tried to use the Stitcher, but it wasn't giving me as much information as I thought. And any specific reason for that?
Yeah. So the Stitcher is a very powerful tool when you're ramping into a company. And let's first talk about what the Stitcher does and what are some of the known issues with the Stitcher. So if I look at, let's say I want to dig into a singular concept for a company. Let's say in PayPal's case, let's find some really weird esoteric concepts, right? Let's say, for instance, I want to see the non-GAAP transaction expense result for PayPal. So what you can do is you can right-click into your data, and at the very top, you'll see this item called Stitcher. If you hit Stitcher, what it's going to do is in real time, we're going to take that location where the data exists for that one concept, and we're going to stitch it together. So in PayPal's case, they give you a presentation where non-GAAP transaction expense is disclosed. And so we're going to take the slide from 2022 Q2, stitch it with the slide from the quarter before, and the quarter before that, and the quarter before that. The reason this is powerful is because now, in order to find the source of all of these data points, you don't have to click through every single number. You can simply right-click Stitcher and get them all stitched together, right? This works with every single data point. You can come into a really sporadic guidance, right-click into it, and pull up Stitcher, right? This will work for all of them, right? So this is guidance for GAAP EPS. So you can come in here and you can observe all the different things, right? We're going to stitch together the guidance, regardless of where it's coming from, right? In this case, sometimes it comes from the 8K, sometimes it comes from the slides, and so on. However, the Stitcher only works when there are hyperlinks. So what the Stitcher is really doing is it's taking each hyperlink in each of these data points and creating a snapshot. So what we know that some customers do is they don't like to have all the hyperlinks in their models. So they would actually remove all the hyperlinks. So if I were to come in here and I were to remove all the hyperlinks, right? So now that all these hyperlinks are gone, unfortunately, that also means that Stitcher is no longer going to work for the data without a hyperlink. So I'm going to run the same stitching exercise. And you will now notice that all the information before here is now gone. And it's gone because I have removed the hyperlink. So when people realize that the Stitcher doesn't work, it's usually because of one of two reasons. The first reason is they have either removed all the hyperlinks in the quarters before, or the second reason is you have built your own model and you have retrofitted Daloopa's data into your model. When we retrofit data into your model, we are only inserting 1 quarter of hyperlink. So when you run Stitcher on that 1 quarter, you are not going to get all the previous results because the hyperlinks are simply not there, right? So that's the technology behind what drives Stitcher, and therefore, if you don't have hyperlinks in your previous quarters, unfortunately, it's not going to work.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. A very powerful feature as well. Now, with regards to KPIs, and this is actually especially as we approach the next earnings season. So some key KPIs are very critical when it comes to the investment decision making. How long does it typically take from the release until they're actually available or updated in Daloopa's database?
Yeah, so in general, we target for 90 minutes to update every single line item in your models. But I want to be more specific, right? 90 minutes is the average, which means that there are companies that will take longer and there are companies that will take less time. A company like Apple Hospitality REIT with 4,000 data points and asset level disclosures will tend to take longer than 90 minutes. And a company like Apple Inc., the iPhone company, is going to take like 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe. So it really depends on how much disclosure there is. However, there is a new development in our plugin. So if you were to go onto our website, and you were to download the latest version of our plugin, 1.4.1, there's a dash beta here. This is what I'm going to talk about. The beta feature within the plugin comes in this form, this little button called real-time update. If you were to turn this button on, what that is going to do is that's going to enable real-time update. So hypothetically, let's say my company has reported earnings at 4:05. It's now 4:15. Right? Daloopa hasn't told me that the whole model is updated because Daloopa is updating the model. But the way we update models is that we're going through every single item row by row, just like how you would do it. We just tend to be faster because we have machines operating on it. What you can do is if you turn this on and you hit update, you will grab whatever data we have in existence. So your whole model might not update, but parts of your model will. The way Daloopa does real-time updates is that we prioritize KPIs, income statements, and operating drivers before any other disclosure. So if you need data right away, you can come in here, turn on real-time update, and hit update. After everything is over, we send you an email 60, 70 minutes post earnings. You can then update again to get all the data in. If you don't turn on real-time update and you hit update, we will not give you any data until the last data point is ready in our database. If you turn it on, we're going to give you data as we prepare them. So that's the beta feature, right? With this feature, theoretically, your first data point should come in within minutes of the AK being filed.
Yeah, and I'm glad actually you covered that, Thomas, because this is a very, very exciting new feature, and we already released it, but I think it's going to be very useful to our clients as the next earnings season. Very, very exciting stuff. So the last question, I know we have 1 minute, but the last question is, KPIs sometimes are reported in unstructured formats like charts, presentations, etc. How does Daloopa capture them as well?
Yeah, so what we do at Daloopa in the back end is we have hundreds of AI algorithms running all day, every day, 24/7, checking through every document there is out there. And we have a team of 200 financial analysts that's constantly auditing and validating the work that's being done by the AI algorithms. So these analysts will do anything that a regular analyst will do, from reading an income statement to going through footnotes to evaluating guidance and so on. So you're absolutely right. Most of the critical KPIs we've noticed tend to not exist within tables, but that's the beauty of the system that Daloopa runs, which is we actually spend about 80-90% of all of our time and effort gathering data from the unstructured formats, from tables, from charts, in PDFs, in pictures, in footnotes, in foreign language disclosures. That's where the power of Daloopa really comes in, because the reality is the simple stuff like the income statement, the balance sheet, that's not the difficult part. That's not why our clients like us. It's because we're able to collect data like this net income on the low end that's only been disclosed once and is buried in some footnote, right, in a very extensive AK. So there's little things like that.
Yeah, and it's extremely, extremely useful because, to your point, Thomas, I think we try to capture as any data that's publicly available, and then put it up for our clients. So very, very exciting stuff. That was actually the last question, Thomas. I know we're at time now. Was there anything else that you want to add?
No, I think that's it.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you all for joining today. A recording will be available on YouTube and LinkedIn. And our next episode will actually be covering how to build and update industry models efficiently using Daloopa. So we'll be on the lookout for that invite. All right, well, thank you, Thomas. Really, really, very, very insightful. Really, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you.